Hi guys, it's Mrs. Millison. Okay, I'm going to do an overview of inheritance. Okay, so I have a class file called person. Okay, all I'm going to do is put some instance variables in it. Oops, first name and last name. Because every person has a first name and a last name. Okay, that's all I need. Oh, I'm not using my variables. I already know that. Okay, so now I'm going to create another file where I'm going to test all of my class files. So I'm just going to call this tester. Okay. Tester file. Okay, so this will have my main method in it. Uh, okay, let me compile this, make sure I'm good. Okay, so I have my person class. There's no constructors. I don't have any methods in here. All I have is my instance variables. But if I come over to my tester file, I can create a person object. Okay, so we'll call them per1. Okay, and I can print. I can print what the person is. Okay, what is their first and last name, which of course we know will be null because I didn't put any parameters in here because I don't have a constructor with parameters. Okay, so let's see what happens. Okay, so I actually created a person object and I printed it, but all that's printing is the memory location. Okay, I don't have any values in for first and last name because I have not created that constructor yet. And it printed the memory location because I haven't overwritten it or overwritten the string to string method to actually print the first and last name. But how is all this happening? Okay, when I don't even have anything in my class file. How it's happening is every class file inherits a default constructor where the instance variables will just be empty, null, zero, or whatever, and a toString print method to print the memory location. Okay, and it's from a main class file called object. Okay, so every class file you create extends object, and when something extends from another file, it is inheriting those characteristics of that other class. Okay, so there's this object class that is built into Java that every class you create extends from. Okay, we don't need to write extends object because it naturally does it. Okay, when we're going to inherit we're going to create another class and inherit the characteristics of person, and then we will need to use extends. Okay, so I'm going to delete this. Okay, actually I'm going to put a little comment here because you don't need it. Okay, so I don't want you to think you need it. um, so what we're going to do now is let's go ahead. We don't want to use the default constructor. We want to build our own, and we want to print more than just the memory location. So if I come back into my class file, I can overwrite that default constructor and that print option to print the memory location with what I want to print. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to overwrite the constructor. And of course, we want to put parameters in there. Okay, I'm just going to do F and L for first and last name. So for our constructor, we know first name will equal the F variable from the parameter, and last name will equal L. So now I have, oh gosh, now I have overwritten that default constructor that comes from that main object class file. Okay, that main object class that was brought into every class file. We inherited it when we create a class file. So now when I go to run this, I'm going to get an error because this constructor doesn't exist anymore. Okay, because I have overwritten it with my customized constructor. I could have done an empty constructor with no parameters, and that would have also overwritten it. So now I got to come back here. We'll modify this. Okay, so now I'm good. So now this constructor will read the constructor I created that overwrote the constructor that came from that object file. Okay, now of course, when I come back here and try to print, it's still going to print the memory location because I have not overwritten that default printing. Okay, so when I come back here, I'm going to just put my string to string method. And we're just going to return the first name, first and last name. Oops. Oops. I always forget to capitalize. Okay, so now that I have my own customized toString method, now when I try to print a person object, now it will truly print what I want it to print. Okay. Okay. So that's why we have that memory location and we have that kind of standardized default constructor. Okay. But we always tend to do our own. Okay. So that's kind of where inheritance comes from. Okay. Because every class file you create inherits that default constructor and that toString print method from this object class. Okay. And again, we don't even think about it and we always overwrite the stuff anyway. All right. So now let's create another class file called student that we're going to inherit all these things from the person file. So when you create a class file and you want to inherit the instance variables and the methods from another class file, why? Well, I don't want to have to redo these variables or redo this toString method. Okay. And this is a very simple example, but we could have multiple instance variables. Why duplicate them again in another class when they already exist here? Okay, so I could just inherit them into my next class. Same thing with methods. Again, I have one method, but if I had lots and lots of methods and I just wanted to kind of use them in a different class, I could inherit them from the class where I built them. Okay, so I'm going to do another class called student um, because all students are people. Okay, and all students, since they're people, will have a first and last name. But my students will also have an ID number. Okay, we'll do int. Oops. Not every person has an ID number. Okay. Now, in order for the student to I keep saying inherit wrong. The first and last name from the person file, I need to extend it. Okay, so student is going to extend person. Okay, so this is telling the student file to go look at the person file and get the rest of the instance variables. Okay, let me compile. Is it extend? I think I always do extend. No. No, it is extends. All right, give me a sec. What am I doing? Implicit superconstructor person is undefined for the default constructor. Okay, let's go ahead and put our constructor in here. Okay, so now I want to do a constructor for the student file. Okay, for the student class, but I want to grab the first and last name from the parent class. Okay, so I do have to create a constructor here, public student, and when I create students, I still need their first and last name. Okay, but I also need their ID number. Okay, I'll do ID num. But what I want to do is I want to grab the instance variables from the parent class that I inherited them from. So the parent class is called the superclass. The class that did the inheriting, this is the child class or the subclass. So all I have to do to grab the first and last name is identify it as super. Okay, So I'm just going to do F comma L for last name, and it will go to the file, the class file that I extended, that I inherited from, okay, person, and it'll look for uh, the constructor that has those two strings, okay, the same signature line, and it'll know to assign them to the first and last name, okay. Of course, I still need to do ID number, needs to be matched to the ID number instance variable in the student class. Okay, now let's compile and see if I get in there. Okay, good. So this saves me the time of having to create that first and last name instance variable again when it's already created in that parent or super class. Okay, so now let's come over here to our tester file and let's create a student. Do stu1. And I need a first name, a last name, and an ID number. Oops, I don't need a space there. And I'll just do 1, 2, 3, 4 as an ID number. Okay, so now when I print, okay, now when I print, it prints the student's first and last name. Now, why does it print the student's first and last name? Well, let's think about this. In my student file, I don't have a two-string print method, okay? But since student inherited from person, it goes back to the person class file and uses its two-string print method, okay? That's why I only got the first and last name. But then I think to myself, well, I would really like to print the ID number. Well, I'm not going to put that here in the person class file because there is no ID number in here. I have to put that in my student file. So now I'm going to come down here and I'm going to do a string to string method. I definitely want the ID. But you know what? I also want the first and last name. So I'm going to grab it from here, from the parent or the super class. All right. I'm not going to repeat this. So what I do is I come in here and I type super again, and then I run the method that I want. So I want the super two string method. Okay. So that will grab the first and last name from the two string method in the person class, which was the parent or the super class. Okay. Let's put some space in here. Let's see. We'll put some text in here. ID number. Let's put some text in front of it too. Let's say name. Okay. So now when I print a student, it should say name and then their name and then ID number. When I print a person, it's still just going to say their first and last name. Okay. Let's compile. Oh, I forgot my semicolon. Okay. I'll go to our tester file and now we'll run. Okay. So Barb Mill was just a person. So all I printed was the first and last name, and all I had was the first and last name. David Jones was a student, so I have a first name and a last name and an ID number, but I inherited the first and last name from the instance variables and the printing and the two string method from the parent or superclass person. Okay, so I didn't have to do first and last name in the student file because I inherited it from the person class file. Okay, so that's why I designated extends person. Okay, so it saves a lot of time that you don't have to duplicate code. Okay, and again, this is a very simplified example. All right, let's do one more thing. If I have a person, let's do person 2. Can this be a new student? Okay, now I got to remember when I do a student constructor, I have to do first name, last name, and ID number. So we'll do, I don't know. Oops. 7654. Will this compile? Okay. Okay, it says never read. This will compile because all students are people, are a person. Okay. So I could come down here and I could print. Let's see what we're going to get. Okay, so I get Sam Smith and ID. Oh, I need to put a little space before the ID. Okay. However, what I can't do is this. Then for person, I need uh, okay. What I can't do is this. Let me compile. This isn't going to work because all people are not students. Okay. So I cannot construct a person. I cannot construct a new person and make them a student because all people are not students. I could construct a new student and label them as a person. Okay. Because all students are people, because student inherited from person. Person did not inherit it from student. Okay. So this is not doable. Okay. I just wanted you to see that. So you can understand kind of the hierarchy here. Okay. All right. I think that is it for my overview. So again, I started with this person class file, and all class files you create inherit or are extended from the main object class file that's built into Java. Okay, so really all you need are some instance variables. You kind of have a default constructor and you have that toString method that just prints the memory location. But once you overwrite them with your own constructor and your own toString method, the default ones are gone. Okay. Then I created a class file student that I inherited all the variables from person. Okay. So when my student, I'm going to do my first and last name. Okay. And I'm going to grab some of the toString method um, from the person file. Okay. But I'm going to embellish it a little bit and add what I needed to for a student. Okay. One more thing before we stop. I just want to say I can inherit instance variables and methods. I don't actually inherit um, a constructor. I reference the constructor from the superclass or the parent class, but I don't actually inherit the constructor. I always have to build my own constructor um, in my class file. Okay, if it's a sub or a child class. Okay, all right. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you next time.